You've been lied to about the gray rock method. Not maliciously, not even on purpose, but the version your therapist taught you, the version your favorite YouTube psychologist explained, the version every self-help article on dealing with narcissists describes. That version is the watered-down survival edition. It was never designed to do what you actually want it to do. You want the manipulator to collapse. You want the person who's been draining you for months or years to feel what it's like to be on the other side. You want them to lose. And the version of gray rock you've been taught will not give you that. In 2012, an anonymous blogger going by the name Skylar published a post on a website called Love Fraud. She didn't invent a clinical technique. She invented a metaphor. She wrote that you should imagine yourself as a gray, boring rock, the kind you walk past every single day without noticing. That metaphor went viral inside survivor support communities. Therapists picked it up, articles followed, and eventually it became gospel. But here's what no one will admit out loud. There is no clinical research on the gray rock method. None. Dr. W. Keith Campbell, professor of psychology at the University of Georgia, has stated openly that no real research exists on this. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, the most famous voice in the entire narcissistic abuse recovery space, has admitted that she stumbled across the term on a support website and that it's not an officially studied therapeutic technique. You've been practicing a 14-year-old blog post, and it hasn't been working the way you hoped, has it? You go quiet, and they get worse. You stop reacting, and they escalate. You feel like a stone, and they keep throwing themselves at you harder. That's not a failure of the method. That is the method working at the wrong level. The defensive layer is the only layer your therapist gave you. There's a second layer underneath it, a Machiavellian one, and once you understand it, the gray rock method stops being a coping mechanism and starts being a weapon. Look at the version you were taught. Strip it down to its bare instructions, and you'll find something almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Be boring. Speak in short answers. Use yes, no, and I don't know. Don't share your feelings. Don't share your goals. Don't share your relationships. Avoid eye contact when you can. Smile and nod just enough to close the conversation. That's it. That's the whole technique your therapist learned from a 14-year-old internet post. The intention behind it is purely defensive. Therapists frame gray rock as a way to survive a relationship you cannot leave yet. A way to stop being torn apart in the meantime. Dr. Brianne Markley describes it as choosing not to engage with someone who is emotionally volatile. Dr. Craig Malkin from Harvard Medical School puts it even more bluntly. It's not about them having some amazing insight. It's about protecting yourself. Read those words again. Protecting, surviving, coping, boundaries. These are the verbs your therapist uses. Notice what's missing. Nothing about consequences for the manipulator. Nothing about the person who's been harming you actually paying a price. Nothing about you regaining lost power. The therapeutic frame treats you as a wounded animal that needs to disappear into the underbrush until the predator gives up. And then your therapist hedges. Every reputable source on gray rock comes loaded with warnings. They tell you it might escalate the abuse. The next warning is that it's not a long-term solution. You're also told that suppressing your authentic emotions for too long can cause emotional numbing in your other relationships. And before you even try it, they urge you to seek professional help if there's any risk of physical danger. The Journal of Personality and Social Psychology has even published research suggesting that prolonged emotional detachment strategies can spread into how you relate to people you actually love. So your therapist hands you a tool, then immediately tells you the tool is dangerous, may not work, and could damage you if you use it too long. That isn't a strategy. That's a liability waiver dressed up as advice, and it leaves you exactly where you started. Quiet on the outside, screaming on the inside. With a manipulator who's escalating because nothing has actually changed about the underlying power dynamic. Here's what your therapist will not tell you. The reason the defensive version feels so unsatisfying is that it's incomplete. The Machiavellian version is what makes it actually work. And that version was never going to come from a clinical psychologist, because clinical psychologists are professionally forbidden from teaching you how to dominate another human being's psyche. They can only teach you how to retreat from one. Now you're going to learn what they cannot teach you. In Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, which is the closest thing the modern world has to a working translation of Machiavellian thought, there's a single sentence that rewires the entire gray rock method. Greene writes that your goal is to annoy your enemy by keeping your cool, and so take control. Manipulate them, so they lose their temper. Destabilize them to attack assertively. Read that twice. The intention is not to disappear. The intention is to destabilize. Same external behavior, completely different internal posture. Where your therapist teaches you to become invisible so the predator loses interest, the strategist teaches you to become unreadable so the predator loses control. The first is hiding, the second is hunting. This is the layer that turns gray rock into dark psychology. And before you flinch at that phrase, understand exactly what it means. Dark psychology is not evil. It's the study of how ordinary psychological mechanisms, persuasion, influence, emotional connection, can be weaponized. It spans social psychology, behavioral science, criminology, even marketing. What links those worlds is intent, the deliberate, calculated use of psychological tactics to influence outcomes that another person did not choose. When a manipulator uses these mechanisms against you without your awareness, that's abuse. When you use the same understanding to neutralize them, that's self-defense at the highest level. The technique doesn't change, the intent does. And intent is everything. Think of it as the difference between a bodyguard and a bouncer. A bodyguard absorbs blows. A bouncer ends the night. The defensive gray rock asks you to absorb. The Machiavellian gray rock asks you to end it. Green calls this the cultivation of an analytical mind. A mind that not only thinks more than it feels, but that subdues feeling with thought. Emotive reasoning, he writes, encourages fallibility, transparency, and self-exposure, all of which are anti-Machiavellian, all of which are exactly what the manipulator counts on you displaying. So when you stop displaying them, the manipulator doesn't just lose your supply, the manipulator loses the map. They have no idea what move you'll make next, because you're not making any moves at all that they can read. You become the one variable in their equation that they cannot predict, and predictability is the air they breathe. The Machiavellian upgrade reframes every single instruction in the original technique. You don't speak in short answers because you're afraid. You speak in short answers because every word you give them is data they will weaponize. You don't avoid sharing your feelings because you can't handle the reaction. You avoid sharing your feelings because revealing your inner state to someone who farms inner states is the same as handing a hunter your tracks. You don't nod and smile to end the conversation. You nod and smile because that face, pleasant, blank, unreachable, is the most psychologically devastating expression you can wear in front of someone who needs your distress to feel real. This is no longer a survival mechanism. This is psychological warfare in its quietest form. And to deploy it, you need one thing the therapist version never asks of you. You need emotional control. Here's the part almost no one teaches you, because it requires a clinical understanding of what's actually happening inside the manipulator while you stand there saying nothing. In 1938, the psychoanalyst Otto Fenichel introduced a concept that would become foundational to every modern theory of narcissism. He called it narcissistic supply. He described it as a pathological need for admiration and attention rooted in early childhood deprivation. He argued that the people who develop these traits never built an internal sense of self-worth, and so they require a constant external feed of recognition, reaction, and emotional response just to maintain the illusion of being someone. You've been that feed. Sam Vaknin, the visiting professor of psychology and author of Malignant Self-Love, expanded the concept further. He distinguished between primary supply, the direct admiration, attention, and emotional responsiveness the narcissist extracts from intimate partners, and secondary supply, the stability and social status a long-term partner provides. When you cry, when you defend yourself, when you explain, when you beg, when you rage, when you plead, every single one of those reactions is primary supply. You're not just hurting, you're feeding. Now imagine cutting that off completely. Not just the food, but every nutrient the food contains. That's what the weaponized gray rock does. And what happens inside the manipulator is not a polite loss of interest. It's something psychologists have actually documented in clinical literature. Vaknin describes it as narcissistic deficiency dysphoria. When the supply is cut, the narcissist's movements slow. Their sleep becomes disordered. They are constantly dysphoric, unable to find pleasure in anything. They experience violent mood swings, mostly rage attacks. They will compulsively turn to alternative addictions to fill the void: alcohol, drugs, reckless driving, compulsive shopping, sexual acting out. In severe cases, they experience brief decompensatory psychotic episodes. Read that list again. That is the clinical description of what your silence does to them. That's what the absence of your reaction looks like from the inside of their nervous system. And the science behind this isn't mystical. It's behavioral psychology at its most basic. Dr. J.J. Kennedy, who holds a doctorate in applied neuroscience, describes the mechanism this way. The gray rock method leverages a fundamental principle of behavioral psychology. When a behavior is no longer reinforced, it eventually extinguishes. For narcissists who depend on emotional reactions as their primary reinforcement, removing those reactions is the most effective way to reduce manipulative behavior over time. But here's where almost everyone gets ambushed and quits. Behavior doesn't extinguish in a straight line. It extinguishes through something called an extinction burst. When a behavior that's been consistently reinforced suddenly stops being reinforced, the brain panics. It doesn't assume the reward is gone forever. It assumes the reward needs to be earned harder, so the behavior temporarily intensifies. It gets louder, faster, more desperate, more aggressive. The narcissist's manipulation doesn't fade, it explodes first. This is the moment most people think the gray rock method has failed. They feel the heat coming. They feel the verbal attacks getting sharper, the accusations more outrageous, the silent treatments longer, the love bombing more grotesque. And they break, they engage, they explain, they defend, and the manipulator wins, because the brain just learned that escalation gets results. If you understand the extinction burst, you understand that the storm is the proof the strategy is working. The escalation is the manipulator's nervous system thrashing against withdrawal, the same way an addict gets worse before getting clean. The neuroscience here is not metaphorical. The intermittent reinforcement schedule that defines a narcissistic relationship hijacks the same dopamine pathways that drive substance addiction. When you cut the supply, you trigger the exact same neurochemical crash. And like every addict in withdrawal, they will do anything to get one more hit. Your job is to give them nothing. Not anger, not pity, not pleading, not a fight. Nothing. Now you have the framework. Now you have the science. Now you have the intent. What you need next is the deployment protocol, and it reduces to 3 principles. Never react. Never explain. Stay silent. These aren't 3 nice ideas. They're the 3 ruthless laws of power that turn the gray rock method from a metaphor into a weapon. The first principle is never react. This doesn't mean you become a statue. It means you become a poor mirror. When the manipulator throws emotional bait, you reflect nothing back. They insult you, and you blink slowly. They accuse you of something outrageous, and you say, interesting. They withdraw affection to punish you, and you go about your evening. The performance is not stillness. The performance is mild, indifferent acknowledgement. They are watching for the flicker of pain across your face, the catch in your throat, the hand that goes to the heart. Give them none of it. Make them work harder for a reaction they will not get. This is where emotional control becomes the entire foundation of the techniques. You cannot simulate non-reaction if you haven't trained yourself to actually not be reacting on the inside. The manipulator can read fake calm. They've spent years studying the difference between someone who is suppressing rage and someone who genuinely is not feeling rage anymore. The first is bait, because suppressed rage will eventually leak. The second is terrifying, because it means they have lost their hook in you completely. The work then is not just behavioral, it's internal. You have to actually become the rock. The second principle is never explain. This is the principle that makes everyone uncomfortable, because explaining feels civilized. It feels like the adult thing to do. It feels like clearing the air. But explaining is the most expensive thing you can do in front of a manipulator, because every sentence you offer is one more ingredient they get to cook with. They will take your reasoning and use it against you. They'll twist your context into a confession. They'll store your justifications and play them back at you months later, edited beyond recognition. When you stop explaining, you starve the system of the raw material it runs on. Their accusations remain accusations. They never become arguments. The narcissist needs the back and forth to maintain the illusion of moral parity. Without the back and forth, they're just a person yelling into an empty room, and on some level they know it. The third principle is stay silent. Silence is the most misunderstood weapon in the entire arsenal of human conflict, because most people believe silence is empty. Silence is not empty. Silence is full of everything the manipulator is afraid you might be thinking. When you say nothing, they fill your silence with their own paranoia. They start to wonder what you know. They start to wonder who you have spoken to. They start to wonder if your blank face is actually contempt. They start to wonder if you have already decided to leave. The longer you hold the silence, the more elaborate their internal narrative becomes, and the more frantic their behavior gets to extract any signal that confirms or denies the story they are telling themselves. This is the Machiavellian insight that the original blog post never reached. Silence does not just deny supply. Silence generates anxiety in the other person at compounding interest. Every minute you stay silent, the price of your eventual word goes up, and the manipulator becomes more willing to do almost anything to make you speak. So now look at what's actually happened. You walked into this dynamic believing you were the powerless one. You believed the manipulator held all the cards because they had your emotional reactions on a leash. They could pull, and you would respond. They could provoke, and you would defend. They could withhold, and you would chase. Now invert the entire diagram. Their leash on you was real, but it wasn't the only leash in the room. The leash that connects them to your reaction is the same leash that connects them to your supply. You're not just on the other end of their pull. You're the source of their fix. The whole time they were operating on you, they were also dependent on you, and you never noticed because the dependency was disguised as dominance. The moment you stop reacting, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stay silent, the leash reverses direction. They start pulling, and nothing comes back. They throw bait, and the surface stays still. They escalate, and the only sound they hear is their own voice getting louder in an empty room. Within weeks, sometimes within days, you'll see things in them you have never seen before. You'll see them off balance for the first time. You'll see desperation creep into the corners of their performance. The mask will slip in ways they cannot repair because it was built to be worn in front of a reactive audience, and you have stopped being one. This is what the strategists know that the therapists cannot say out loud. The gray rock method is not a defense. It was never meant to be a defense. It is the cleanest, quietest, most legally protected form of psychological counter-warfare you will ever have access to in a relationship you cannot immediately leave. It does not require you to confront. It does not require you to argue. You do not even need to be brave. It only requires you to understand what is actually happening underneath the surface, and to refuse to keep feeding the system that has been eating you. Never react. Never explain. Stay silent. These are the 3 ruthless laws of power that govern the entire upgrade. Memorize them. Embody them. Train yourself in emotional control until the absence of reaction is not a mask but a state, and then watch what happens to the person who built their entire architecture on your willingness to be moved. You'll see them collapse, slowly, in real time, not because you attacked them, because you finally stopped attacking yourself on their behalf. The strategist's view is the simple one. The most devastating thing you can do to a person who has built their power on controlling your reactions is to stop being someone who reacts. Become the rock. Become the silence. Become the unreadable thing that no manipulator on earth can solve. That's the Machiavellian upgrade your therapist could not give you. And once you have it, you will never again mistake quietness for weakness, because you will know exactly what your silence is doing inside the mind of the person on the other side of it.